Chapter 25. He left his door open, however, and when he heard the front doorbell ring, by and by he went halfway down the stairs and stood to listen. He was not much afraid that Morgan would return, but he wished to make sure. Mary appeared in the hall below him, but after a glance toward the front of the house turned back and withdrew. Evidently Isabel had gone to the door. Then a murmur was heard, and George Ambersons' voice, quick and serious, "I want to talk to you, Isabel," and another murmur. Then Isabel and her brother passed the foot of the broad dark stairway, but did not look up, and remained unconscious of the watchful presence above them. Isabel still carried her cloak upon her arm, but Amberson had taken her hand and retained it, and as he led her silently into the library, there was something about her attitude and the pose of her slightly bent head that was both startled and meek. Thus they quickly disappeared from George's sight, hand in hand, and Amberson at once closed the massive double doors of the library. For a time all that George could hear was the indistinct sound of his uncle's voice. What he was saying could not be surmised, though the troubled brotherliness of his tone was evident. He seemed to be explaining something at considerable length, and there were moments when he paused, and George guessed that his mother was speaking, but her voice must have been very low, for it was entirely inaudible to him. Suddenly he did hear her. Through the heavy doors her outcry came, clear and loud. "Oh, no!" It was a cry of protest, as if something her brother told her must be untrue, or, if it were true, the fact he stated must be undone, and it was a sound of sheer pain. Another sound of pain, close to George, followed it. This was a vehement sniffling which broke out just above him, and, looking up, he saw Fanny Minifer on the landing, leaning over the banisters and applying her handkerchief to her eyes and nose. "I can guess what that was about," she whispered huskily. "He's just told her what you did to Eugene." George gave her a dark look over his shoulder. "You go on back to your room," he said, and he began to descend the stairs. But Fanny, guessing his purpose, rushed down and caught his arm, detaining him. "You're not going in there," she whispered huskily. "You don't let go of me." But she clung to him savagely. "No, you don't, Georgie Minifer. You'll keep away from there. You will. You let go of I won't. You come back here. You'll come upstairs and let them alone. That's what you'll do." And with such passionate determination did she clutch and tug, never losing a grip of him somewhere, though George tried as much as he could without hurting her to wrench away. With such utter forgetfulness of her maiden dignity did she assault him that she forced him stumbling upward to the landing. "Of all the ridiculous—" he began furiously, but she spared one hand from its grasp of his sleeve and clapped it over his mouth. "Hush up!" Never for an instant in this grotesque struggle did Fanny raise her voice above a husky whisper. "Hush up! It's indecent, like squabbling outside the door of an operating room. Go on to the top of the stairs. Go on." And when George had most unwillingly obeyed, she planted herself in his way on the top step. "There," she said, "the idea of your going in there now! I never heard of such a thing." And with the sudden departure of the nervous vigor she had shown so amazingly, she began to cry again. "I was an awful fool. I thought you knew what was going on, or I never would have done it. Do you suppose I dreamed you'd go making everything into such a tragedy? Do you?" "I don't care what you dreamed," George muttered. But Fanny went on, always taking care to keep her voice from getting too loud, in spite of her most grievous agitation. "Do you dream I thought you'd go making such a fool of yourself at Mrs. Johnson's? Oh, I saw her this morning. She wouldn't talk to me, but I met George Amberson on my way back, and he told me what you'd done over there. And do you dream I thought you'd do what you've done here this afternoon to Eugene? Oh, I knew that, too. I was looking out of the front bedroom window, and I saw him drive up and then go away again, and I knew you'd been to the door. Of course he went to George Amberson about it, and that's why George is here. He's got to tell Isabel the whole thing now, and you wanted to go in there interfering, God knows what. You stay here and let her brother tell her. He's got some consideration for her." "I suppose you think I haven't," George said, challenging her, and at that Fanny laughed witheringly. "You, considerate of anybody?" "I'm considerate of her good name," he said hotly. "It seems to me that's about the first thing to be considerate of, in being considerate of a person. And look here, it strikes me you're taking a pretty different tack from what you did yesterday afternoon." Fanny wrung her hands. "I did a terrible thing," she lamented. "Now that it's done and too late, I know what it was. I didn't have sense enough just to let things go on. I didn't have any business to interfere, and I didn't mean to interfere. I only wanted to talk and let out a little. I did think you already knew everything I told you. I did, and I'd rather have cut my hand off than stir you up to doing what you have done. I was just suffering so that I wanted to let out a little. I didn't mean any real harm. But now I see what's happened. Oh, I was a fool. I hadn't any business interfering. Eugene never would have looked at me anyhow, and oh, why couldn't I have seen that before? He never came here a single time in his life, except on her account. Never. And I might have let them alone, because he wouldn't have looked at me even if he had never seen Isabel. And they haven't done any harm. She made Wilbur happy, and she was a true wife to him as long as he lived. It wasn't a crime for her to care for Eugene all the time. She certainly never told him she did. And she gave me every chance in the world. She left us alone together every time she could, even since Wilbur died. But what was the use? And here I go, not doing myself a bit of good by it, and just—" Fanny wrung her hands again. "Just ruining them." "I suppose you mean I'm doing that," George said bitterly. "Yes, I do," she sobbed, and drooped upon the stairway railing, exhausted. "On the contrary, I mean to save my mother from a calamity." Fanny looked at him wanly in a tired despair. Then she stepped by him and went slowly to her own door, where she paused and beckoned to him. "What do you want?" "Just come here a minute." "What for?" he asked impatiently. "I just wanted to say something to you." "Well, for heaven's sake, say it. There's nobody to hear." Nevertheless, after a moment, as she beckoned him again, he went to her, profoundly annoyed. "Well, what is it?" "George," she said in a low voice, "I think you ought to be told something. If I were you, I'd let my mother alone." "Oh, my Lord," he groaned, "I'm doing these things for her, not against her." A mildness had come upon Fanny, and she had controlled her weeping. She shook her head gently. "No, I'd let her alone if I were you. I don't think she's very well, George." "She? I never saw a healthier person in my life." "No, she doesn't let anybody know, but she goes to the doctor regularly." "Women are always going to doctors regularly." "No, he told her to." George was not impressed. "It's nothing at all. She spoke of it to me years ago. Some kind of family failing. She said grandfather had it too, and look at him. Hasn't proved very serious with him. You act as if I'd done something wrong in sending that man about his business, and as if I were going to persecute my mother instead of protecting her. By Jove, it's sickening. You told me how all the riffraff in town were busy with her name, and then the minute I lift my hand to protect her, you begin to attack me and—" "Shh!" Fanny checked him, laying her hand on his arm. "Your uncle is going." The library doors were heard opening, and a moment later there came the sound of the front door closing. George moved toward the head of the stairs, then stood listening, but the house was silent. Fanny made a slight noise with her lips to attract his attention, and when he glanced toward her, shook her head at him urgently. "Let her alone," she whispered. "She's down there by herself. Don't go down. Let her alone." She moved a few steps toward him and halted, her face pallid and awestruck, and then both stood listening for anything that might break the silence downstairs. No sound came to them. That poignant silence was continued throughout long, long minutes, while the two listeners stood there under its mysterious spell, and in its plaintive eloquence, speaking as it did of the figure alone in the big dark library where dead Wilbur's new silver frame gleamed in the dimness, there was something that checked even George. Above the aunt and nephew, as they kept this strange vigil, there was a triple window of stained glass to illuminate the landing and upper reaches of the stairway. Figures in blue and amber garments posed gracefully in panels, conceived by some craftsman of the 80s to represent love and purity and beauty. And these figures, leaded to unalterable attitudes, were little more motionless than the two human beings upon whom fell the mottled faint light of the window. The colors were growing dull. Evening was coming on. Fanny Minifer broke the long silence with a sound from her throat, a stifled gasp, and with that great companion of hers, her handkerchief, retired softly to the loneliness of her own chamber. After she had gone, George looked about him bleakly, then on tiptoe crossed the hall and went into his own room, which was filled with twilight. Still tiptoeing, though he could not have said why, he went across the room and sat down heavily in a chair facing the window. Outside there was nothing but the darkening air and the wall of the nearest of the new houses. He had not slept at all the night before, and he had eaten nothing since the preceding day at lunch, but he felt neither drowsiness nor hunger. His set determination filled him, kept him but too wide awake, and his gaze at the grayness beyond the window was wide-eyed and bitter. Darkness had closed in when there was a step in the room behind him. Then someone knelt beside the chair. Two arms went round him with infinite compassion. A gentle head rested against his shoulder, and there came the faint scent as of apple blossoms far away. "You mustn't be troubled, darling," his mother whispered. Chapter 26. George choked. For an instant he was on the point of breaking down, but he commanded himself, bravely dismissing the self-pity roused by her compassion. "How can I help but be?" he said. "No, no," she soothed him. "You mustn't. You mustn't be troubled, no matter what happens." "That's easy enough to say," he protested, and he moved as if to rise. "Just let's stay like this a little while, dear, just a minute or two. I want to tell you. Brother George has been here, and he told me everything about how unhappy you'd been, and how you went so gallantly to that old woman with the opera glasses." Isabel gave a sad little laugh. "What a terrible old woman she is! What a really terrible thing a vulgar old woman can be! Mother, and again he moved to rise. "Must you? It seemed to me such a comfortable way to talk." "Well," she yielded. He rose, helped her to her feet, and pressed the light into being. As the room took life from the sudden lines of fire within the bulbs, Isabel made a deprecatory gesture, and, with a faint laugh of apologetic protest, turned quickly away from George. What she meant was, "You mustn't see my face until I've made it nicer for you." Then she turned again to him, her eyes downcast, but no sign of tears in them, and she contrived to show him that there was the semblance of a smile upon her lips. She still wore her hat, and in her unsteady fingers she held a white envelope, somewhat crumpled. "Now, Mother—" "Wait, dearest," she said, and though he stood stone cold, she lifted her arms, put them round him again, and pressed her cheek lightly to his. "Oh, you do look so troubled, poor dear. One thing you couldn't doubt, beloved boy. You know I could never care for anything in the world as I care for you. Never, never. Now, Mother—" She released him and stepped back. "Just a moment more, dearest. I want you to read this first. We can get at things better." She pressed into his hand the envelope she had brought with her, and as he opened it and began to read the long enclosure, she walked slowly to the other end of the room, then stood there with her back to him and her head drooping a little until he had finished. The sheets of paper were covered with Eugene's handwriting. George Amberson will bring you this, dear Isabel. He is waiting while I write. He and I have talked things over, and before he gives this to you he will tell you what has happened. Of course, I'm rather confused, and haven't had time to think matters out very definitely, and yet I believe I should have been better prepared for what took place today. I ought to have known it was coming, because I have understood for quite a long time that young George was getting to dislike me more and more. Somehow I've never been able to get his friendship. He's always had a latent distrust of me, or something like distrust, and perhaps that's made me sometimes a little awkward and diffident with him. I think it may be he felt from the first that I cared a great deal about you, and he naturally resented it. I think perhaps he felt this even during all the time when I was so careful, at least I thought I was, not to show, even to you, how immensely I did care. And he may have feared that you were thinking too much about me, even when you weren't, and only liked me as an old friend. It's perfectly comprehensible to me, also, that at his age one gets excited about gossip. Dear Isabel, what I'm trying to get at, in my confused way, is that you and I don't care about this nonsensical gossip ourselves at all. Yesterday I thought the time had come when I could ask you to marry me, and you were dear enough to tell me sometime it might come to that. Well, you and I, left to ourselves, and knowing what we have been and what we are, we'd pay as much attention to talk as we would to any other kind of old cat's mewing. We'd not be very apt to let such things keep us from the plenty of life we have left to us for making up to ourselves for old unhappinesses and mistakes. But now we're faced with, not the slander and not our own fear of it, because we haven't any, but someone else's fear of it, your son's. And, oh, dearest woman in the world, I know what your son is to you, and it frightens me. Let me explain a little. I don't think he'll change. At 21 or 22 so many things appear solid and permanent and terrible, which 40 sees are nothing but disappearing miasma. 40 can't tell 20 about this, that's the pity of it. 20 can find out only by getting to be 40. And so we come to this, dear. Will you live your own life your way or George's way? I'm going a little further, because it would be fatal not to be wholly frank now. George will act toward you as only your long worship of him, your sacrifices, all the unseen little ones every day since he was born, will make him act. Dear, it breaks my heart for you, but what you have to oppose now is the history of your own selfless and perfect motherhood. I remember saying once that what you worshipped in your son was the angel you saw in him, and I still believe that is true of every mother. But in a mother's worship she may not see that the will in her son should not always be offered in sense along with the angel. I grow sick with fear for both you and me, when I think how the will against us two has grown strong through the love you have given the angel, and how long your own sweet will has served that other. Are you strong enough, Isabel? Can you make the fight? I promise you that if you will take heart for it, you will find so quickly that it has all amounted to nothing. You shall have happiness, and in a little while only happiness. You need only to write me a line. I can't come to your house, and tell me where you will meet me. We will come back in a month, and the angel and your son will bring him to you. I promise it. What is good in him will grow so fine once you have beaten the turbulent will, but it must be beaten. Your brother, that good friend, is waiting with such patience. I should not keep him longer, and I am saying too much for wisdom, I fear. But, oh, my dear, won't you be strong? Such a little short strength it would need. Don't strike my life down twice, dear. This time I've not deserved it. Eugene. Concluding this missive, George tossed it abruptly from him, so that one sheet fell upon his bed, and the others upon the floor, and at the faint noise of their falling, Isabel came, and kneeling, began to gather them up. Did you read it, dear? George's face was pale no longer, but pink with fury. Yes, I did. All of it? She asked gently as she rose. Certainly. She did not look at him, but kept her eyes downcast upon the letter in her hands, tremulously rearranging the sheets in order as she spoke. And though she smiled, her smile was as tremulous as her hands. Nervousness and an irresistible timidity possessed her. I wanted to say, George," she faltered, "I felt that if some day it should happen, I mean, if you could come to feel differently about it, and Eugene and I, that is, if we found that it seemed the most sensible thing to do, I was afraid you might think it would be a little queer about Lucy, I mean, if she were your stepsister. Of course, she'd not be even legally related to you, and if you cared for her—" Thus far she got stumblingly with what she wanted to say, while George watched her with a gaze that grew harder and hotter. But here he cut her off. "I have already given up all idea of Lucy," he said. "Naturally, I couldn't have treated her father as I deliberately did treat him. I could hardly have done that and expected his daughter ever to speak to me again." Isabel gave a quick cry of compassion, but he allowed her no opportunity to speak. "You needn't think I'm making any particular sacrifice," he said sharply, "though I would, quickly enough, if I thought it necessary in a matter of honor like this. I was interested in her, and I could even say I did care for her, but she proved pretty satisfactorily that she cared little enough about me. She went away right in the midst of a difference of opinion we were having. She didn't even let me know she was going, and never wrote a line to me, and then came back telling everyone she'd had a perfectly gorgeous time. That's quite enough for me. I'm not precisely the sort to arrange for that kind of thing to be done to me more than once. The truth is, we're not congenial, and we'd found that much out at least before she left. We should never have been happy. She was superior all the time, and critical of me. Not very pleasant, that. I was disappointed in her, and I might as well say it. I don't think she has the very deepest nature in the world, and—" But Isabel put her hand timidly on his arm. "Georgie, dear, this is only a quarrel. All young people have them before they get adjusted, and you mustn't let—" "If you please," he said emphatically, moving back from her. "This isn't that kind. It's all over, and I don't care to speak of it again. It's settled. Don't you understand?" "But, dear—" "No, I want to talk to you about this letter of her father's." "Yes, dear, that's why it's simply the most offensive piece of writing that I've ever held in my hands." She stepped back from him, startled. "But, dear, I thought—" "I can't understand your even showing me such a thing," he cried. "How did you happen to bring it to me?" "Your uncle thought I'd better. He thought it was the simplest thing to do, and he said that he'd suggested it to Eugene, and Eugene had agreed. They thought—" "Yes," George said bitterly. "I should like to hear what they thought." "They thought it would be the most straightforward thing." George drew a long breath. "Well, what do you think, mother?" "I thought it would be the simplest and most straightforward thing. I thought they were right." "Very well. We'll agree it was simple and straightforward. Now, what do you think of that letter itself?" She hesitated, looking away. Of course, I don't agree with him in the way he speaks of you, dear, except about the angel. I don't agree with some of the things he implies. You've always been unselfish. Nobody knows that better than your mother. When Fanny was left with nothing, you were so quick and generous to give up what really should have come to you, and yet," George broke in, "you see what he implies about me. Don't you think really that this was a pretty insulting letter for that man to be asking you to hand your son?" "Oh, no," she cried. "You can see how fair he means to be. And he didn't ask for me to give it to you. It was Brother George who—" "Never mind that now. You say he tries to be fair, and yet do you suppose it ever occurs to him that I'm doing my simple duty? That I'm doing what my father would do if he were alive? That I'm doing what my father would ask me to do if he could speak from his grave out yonder? Do you suppose it ever occurs to that man for 1 minute that I'm protecting my mother?" George raised his voice, advancing upon the helpless lady fiercely, and she could only bend her head before him. He talks about my will, how it must be beaten down. Yes, and he asks my mother to do that little thing to please him. What for? Why does he want me beaten by my mother? Because I'm trying to protect her name. He's got my mother's name bandied up and down the streets of this town till I can't step in those streets without wondering what every soul I meet is thinking of me and my family. And now he wants you to marry him so that every gossip in town will say, "There, what did I tell you? I guess that proves it's true." You can't get away from it. That's exactly what they'd say. And this man pretends he cares for you and yet asks you to marry him and give them the right to say it. He says he and you don't care what they say, but I know better. He may not care. Probably he's that kind, but you do. There never was an Amberson yet that would let the Amberson name go trailing in the dust like that. It's the proudest name in this town, and it's going to stay the proudest. And I tell you, that's the deepest thing in my nature. Not that I'd expect Eugene Morgan to understand. The very deepest thing in my nature is to protect that name and to fight for it to the last breath when danger threatens it, as it does now through my mother. He turned from her, striding up and down and tossing his arms about in a tumult of gesture. I can't believe it of you that you'd think of such a sacrilege. That's what it would be, sacrilege. When he talks about your unselfishness toward me, he's right. You have been unselfish, and you have been a perfect mother. But what about him? Is it unselfish of him to want you to throw away your good name just to please him? That's all he asks of you, and to quit being my mother. Do you think I can believe you really care for him? I don't. You are my mother, and you're an Amberson, and I believe you're too proud. You're too proud to care for a man who would write such a letter as that. He stopped, faced her, and spoke with more self-control. Well, what are you going to do about it, Mother? George was right about his mother's being proud, and even when she laughed with a Negro gardener, or even those few times in her life when people saw her weep, Isabel had a proud look, something that was independent and graceful and strong. But she did not have it now. She leaned against the wall beside his dressing-table and seemed beset with humility and with weakness. Her head drooped. "What answer are you going to make to such a letter?" George demanded, like a judge on the bench. I don't quite know, dear," she murmured. "You don't?" he cried. "You wait," she begged him. "I'm so confused." "I want to know what you're going to write him. Do you think if you did what he wants you to, I could bear to stay another day in this town, Mother? Do you think I could ever bear even to see you again if you married him? I'd want to, but you surely know I just couldn't." She made a futile gesture and seemed to breathe with difficulty. I wasn't quite sure," she faltered, about its being wise for us to be married, even before knowing how you feel about it. I wasn't even sure it was quite fair to Eugene. I seem to have that family trouble, like father's, that I spoke to you once about." She managed a deprecatory little dry laugh. "Not that it amounts to much, but I wasn't at all sure that it would be fair to him. Marrying doesn't mean so much after all, not at my age. It's enough to know that people think of you, and to see them. I thought we were all, pretty happy the way things were, and I don't think it would mean giving up a great deal for him or me either, if we just went on as we have been. I see him almost every day, and Mother," George's voice was loud and stern, "do you think you could go on seeing him after this?" She had been talking helplessly enough before. Her tone was little more broken now. Not even see him?" "How could you?" George cried. "Mother, it seems to me that if he ever set foot in this house again, I can't speak of it. Could you see him, knowing what talk it makes every time he turns into this street, and knowing what that means to me? I don't understand all this, I don't. If you'd told me a year ago that such things were going to happen, I'd have thought you were insane, and now I believe I am." Then, after a preliminary gesture of despair, as though he meant harm to the ceiling, he flung himself heavily, face downward, upon the bed. His anguish was none the less real for its vehemence, and the stricken lady came to him instantly and bent over him, once more enfolding him in her arms. She said nothing, but suddenly her tears fell upon his head. She saw them and seemed to be startled. "Oh, this won't do," she said. "I've never let you see me cry before, except when your father died. I mustn't." And she ran from the room. A little while after she had gone, George rose and began solemnly to dress for dinner. At one stage of these conscientious proceedings he put on, temporarily, his long black velvet dressing-gown, and, happening to catch sight in his pier glass of the picturesque and medieval figure thus presented, he paused to regard it, and something profoundly theatrical in his nature came to the surface. His lips moved, he whispered half aloud some famous fragments. "'Tis not alone my inky cloak, good mother, nor customary suits of solemn black." For in truth the mirrored princely image, with hair dishevelled on the white brow, and the long tragic fall of black velvet from the shoulders, had brought about, in his thought at least, some comparisons of his own times, so out of joint with those of that other gentle prince and heir whose widowed mother was minded to marry again. "But I have that within which passeth show, these but the trappings and the suits of woe." Not less like Hamlet did he feel and look as he sat gauntly at the dinner table with Fanny to partake of a meal throughout which neither spoke. Isabel had sent word not to wait for her, an injunction it was as well they obeyed, for she did not come at all. But with the renewal of sustenance furnished to his system, some relaxation must have occurred within the high-strung George. Dinner was not quite finished when, without warning, sleep hit him hard. His burning eyes could no longer restrain the lids above them. His head sagged beyond control, and he got to his feet and went lurching upstairs, yawning with exhaustion. From the door of his room, which he closed mechanically, with his eyes shut, he went blindly to his bed, fell upon it soddenly, and slept, with his face full upturned to the light. It was after midnight when he woke, and the room was dark. He had not dreamed, but he woke with the sense that somebody or something had been with him while he slept. Somebody or something infinitely compassionate, somebody or something infinitely protective, that would let him come to no harm and to no grief. He got up and pressed the light on. Pinned to the corner of his dressing-table was a square envelope with the words, "For you, dear," written in pencil upon it, but the message inside was in ink, a little smudged here and there. "I have been out to the mail-box, darling, with a letter I've written to Eugene, and he'll have it in the morning. It would be unfair not to let him know at once, and my decision could not change if I waited. It would always be the same. I think it is a little better for me to write to you like this, instead of waiting till you wake up and then telling you, because I'm foolish and might cry again, and I took a vow once long ago that you should never see me cry. Not that I'll feel like crying when we talk things over tomorrow. I'll be all right and fine, as you say so often, by that time, don't fear. I think what makes me most ready to cry now is the thought of the terrible suffering in your poor face, and the unhappy knowledge that it is I, your mother, who put it there. It shall never come again. I love you better than anything and everything else on earth. God gave you to me, and oh, how thankful I have been every day of my life for that sacred gift, and nothing can ever come between me and God's gift. I cannot hurt you, and I cannot let you stay hurt as you have been, not another instant after you wake up, my darling boy. It is beyond my power, and Eugene was right. I know you couldn't change about this. Your suffering shows how deep-seated the feeling is within you, so I've written him just about what I think you would like me to, though I told him I would always be fond of him, and always his best friend, and I hoped his dearest friend. He'll understand about not seeing him. He'll understand that, though I didn't say it in so many words. You mustn't trouble about that. He'll understand. Good night, my darling, my beloved, my beloved. You mustn't be troubled. I think I shouldn't mind anything very much so long as I have you all to myself, as people say, to make up for your long years away from me at college. We'll talk of what's best to do in the morning, shan't we? And for all this pain, you'll forgive your loving and devoted mother, Isabel.